I was born in 1971, in a small two-bedroom home just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My mother, Lorraine, was 42 at the time. My father, Carl, had just turned 45. They already had a daughter, Caroline, who was almost 13. According to them, their life was complete, and I was, well, as my mother often said with a tight smile, a surprise package we didn't order. She never said it with overt cruelty. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, just the kind of quiet dismissal that cuts deeper than words ever should. She'd say things like, "We were already blessed with one perfect daughter. You were just ... fate's little aid-on." She'd say this while she stitched ribbons on Caroline's Girl Scout sash, or helped her prepare for her debate tournament, always with that same placid tone that said, "This is just the truth, dear." Caroline was the golden child, and everyone in our neighborhood knew it. Smart, poised, born with perfect posture and better timing. She played piano on Sundays at church, and read entire books by the time she was 6. My mother called her Little Ambassador, and my father, when he was home, would ruffle her hair and say, "That's my girl, headed straight for great things." And then there was me, Rachel, the one no one had planned for, the one no one really had room for. From the time I could understand what was being said around me, I knew my arrival had rearranged things in a way no one appreciated. Our house wasn't big, and my crib was wedged between the washing machine and the back pantry for the first 2 years of my life. That pretty much said it all. There's something uniquely painful about growing up in a home where you're not hated, but you're not loved either. You're just there. Background noise. An obligation. Every morning, my dad would drop me off at my Grandma Betty and Grandpa Walter's place, a few blocks away. He'd jingle his keys and say, "All right, Ma, here's the little like I was a sack of groceries. Grandma Betty would always reach out and take me from his arms, with a warmth I still remember. "You're the sparkle in this old house, Rachel," she'd whisper. And for a while, I believed her. At home, Caroline ruled the roost. She didn't have to be mean. She didn't have to be anything, really, because everyone else gave her the spotlight. She floated above the rest of us, with her school plays and leadership awards. Meanwhile, I'd sit cross-legged in the hallway, building Lincoln log houses for my dolls, unnoticed while the real house buzzed with talk of a bright future. The difference in treatment was never subtle. Caroline's report cards were pinned to the fridge with golden star magnets. Mine went into the drawer. My parents attended every single one of her recitals, even when they were tired from work. When I had my 3rd grade open house, my mom said she had a headache, and my dad didn't even pretend to find an excuse. I got used to it, learned how to not expect applause, learned how to fade out of the frame. Grandma Betty and Grandpa Walter, though they saw me, really saw me. Every afternoon, they'd help me with homework. Grandpa was a retired accountant who loved numbers. "Figures don't lie," he'd tell me, tapping his pencil on the kitchen table. "People do, but numbers, they tell you everything you need to know." That stuck with me. Grandma taught high school English for 20 years before arthritis forced her into retirement. She'd sit with me and make vocabulary lists out of old newspaper clippings, turning every mundane moment into a lesson. "Knowledge," she said, "is armor for a life that won't always be fair." She made me feel like I wasn't just the spare daughter. I was someone who mattered, someone who could build something better. Still, every evening I had to return to my parents' house, and every evening, the glow of their faces when Caroline walked in the door was a reminder of the spotlight. I'd never stand in. I kept thinking things might change once Caroline left for college. Maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see me. They didn't. They didn't even blink. Instead, they handed me her chores like they were heirlooms. They said things like, "You're home anyway," or "Your sister did her part at your age." My mother quit cooking one Tuesday in 1985 and never made dinner again. She looked at me, 14 years old, and said, "You're old enough now. You figure it out." And I did, quietly, grudgingly, because I still wanted to be seen. Every act of labor, cleaning, folding, cooking felt like another audition. I wasn't passing. I was trying to earn something that never came. But the invisible child has a secret strength. While Caroline's future was curated like a country club resume, I was learning how to survive, how to adapt, and maybe, how to rise. It would take me years to realize that some spotlights don't shine from above, they burn from within. And as I learned to carry pots and expectations, to stir soups and suppress hope, there was still a small ember inside. Me, one lit by Grandma's voice, Grandpa's pencil tapping on the kitchen table. They saw me, they always had. That ember would eventually become a fire. But first, I had to break free from the shadows of someone else's golden glow. That part of the story begins in the place most dreams do. A college brochure, a stack of hope in a teenager's hands, and a hard truth waiting at the dinner table. Let's go there. If my parents' home was a place of cold duty, then my grandparents' home was the first place I ever felt warmth. Their little yellow farmhouse stood just past the edge of town, nestled under a pair of aging cottonwoods, with wind chimes that sang low and mournful every time a breeze came through. It smelled of cinnamon, old books, and lemon polish, like time had slowed down just long enough for love to linger in the walls. Grandpa Walter and Grandma Betty had lived in that house since the late 50s. It creaked like it had a story to tell, and for a little girl trying to understand why she was always overlooked, it became the first place I ever felt wanted. Walter had worked as a math teacher for nearly 40 years at the local high school. Retired by the time I came around, he filled his afternoons balancing checkbooks with a mechanical pencil, reading the business section aloud, and solving crossword puzzles with war-veteran intensity. But when I arrived after school every day, he put down whatever he was doing. We had a routine. I'd walk through the side door, drop my book bag on the kitchen stool, and he'd already be setting out his old ledger paper and 2 sharpened pencils. "Rachel," he'd say, nodding. "You ready to let numbers tell you the truth?" That was his favorite line. "People lie," he'd mutter, usually under his breath while reading something about Wall Street corruption or a crooked mayor. But numbers ratch, they never do. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I just liked the way his pencil made little clicking sounds on the paper. How he smelled like pipe tobacco and soap. How he never made me feel like I had to earn his approval. In their kitchen floral wallpaper peeling in corners, chipped tiles, underfoot tie, learned the magic of fractions, the logic of patterns, and the beauty of solving something nobody thought you could. Grandpa would furrow his brow, watching me solve equations meant for kids twice my age, and say things like, "This brain of yours, don't you let anyone waste it, especially not people who think you're less than." It was in that same kitchen where I found another kind of learning, the quiet, constant strength of a woman who had raised 4 kids on a steelworker's paycheck and still made time to teach Shakespeare on Saturdays. Grandma Betty was soft-spoken, but never unsure. She had taught English literature until her knees gave out, and even then, she'd correct your grammar with a smile and a gentle "try that again, sweetheart." After homework, we'd cook nothing fancy, just cornbread or stewbit. Every tablespoon, every minute simmering on the stove, was a lesson. "This," she'd say, lifting a ladle, "is how we feed the people we love. This is how you show up, not with words, but with effort." It was never about chores. It was about dignity, about choosing to care, even when no one had ever really done the same for you, and she never missed a beat. If I had a spelling bee, she was front row. A science fair, she'd show up with baked goods for the judges. When I got a certificate for perfect attendance in 5th grade, she framed it herself and hung it next to Caroline's piano recital photo from a decade before. She was, in every sense, my mother, just not the one who gave birth to me. There were nights, especially after a particularly hard day at home, when I'd curl up on their worn couch and cry into her lap, trying to hold it together. Grandma Betty would just stroke my hair and whisper, "Honey, sometimes families forget how to love the ones who need it most. But that's not your fault. That's their wound to carry." Those words stayed with me. I didn't understand back then just how deep that truth ran. That sometimes people love in shallow ways, because that's all they've known. But my grandparents, they loved with depth, with intention, with a kind of steadiness that made you feel like you mattered even on your worst day. They never said "we're proud of you" for big milestones alone. They said it for the little things. To when I got my period and didn't tell anyone but handled it myself. When I got through a week of cooking dinner alone while my mother complained about being tired. When I fixed the laundry machine's spin cycle without asking for help. "You're more than resilient," Grandpa said once. "You're resourceful. That's rarer." Years later, when I sat in business seminars or spoke to high-level executives, I realized they didn't teach what my grandparents taught, not in Ivy League lecture halls or Wall Street boardrooms. They taught grace. They taught integrity. They taught how to love without a scoreboard. And above all, they taught me this: family is not the people who share your blood. It's the people who share your burdens. It's a lesson that would matter more than I ever could have imagined. Because one day, I would have to choose between blood and truth, between the family who birthed me and the family who built me. And when the time came, to give back, to offer kindness. After years of silence, I would remember who had always shown up, for show. Not for obligation, but simply because they believed I was worth loving. I didn't know it yet, but everything they poured into me, the patience, the lessons, the quiet faith, would one day become the foundation I stood on when the ground beneath me started to crack. And as life would have it, that moment came not long after they passed. It came in the form of a key, a house deed, a chance to repay my parents, and the coldest betrayal I never saw coming. Let's talk about that, shall we? There's something haunting about the moment you realize you've gone from daughter to help. I was just 14 when it happened. It didn't come with a conversation or a family meeting. No warning. It came in the form of a damp dish rag and a voice echoing from the hallway. "Rachel," my mother called. "The bathrooms need scrubbing. Start with the upstairs." I had just walked in from school, backpack still slung over one shoulder, math homework poking out the top. I hadn't even taken off my shoes. At first, I thought maybe she was joking. A chore or two was fine. I wasn't lazy. But that was the beginning of a shift I wouldn't fully grasp until years later. That day, the mantle of Caroline's duties was handed down to me like a hand-me-down dress. No one bothered to resize. Only, unlike Caroline, I didn't have anyone cheering me on. It started small, just cleaning, then laundry, then the cooking, and then the schedule became so predictable I could measure time by it: clean on Tuesdays, wash sheets on Thursdays, dinner ready by 6 p.m. sharp every weekday. I became the quiet metronome that kept the house moving, even if no one acknowledged the sound. When I asked timidly why Caroline never had to do these things, my mother said she had different responsibilities. She was busy with real goals. As if my goals weren't real. As if keeping up straight A's while running a household as a teenager didn't count. They called it doing my part. My father, a man who had once taken pride in telling neighbors about Caroline's piano recitals, would simply shrug and say, "You live here, don't you? Family means contributing." Your sister always pulled her weight. But Caroline had already flown the nest. She was at Ohio State, joining sororities, and spending holidays in Colorado with her fiancé's family. She wasn't cleaning mildew out of tile grout after school. She wasn't waking up at 5 a.m. to iron Dad's work shirts because Mom wasn't in the mood. It wasn't just the labor. It was the silence that came with it. The absence of thank yous. The way no one noticed if I ate or if I didn't. The birthdays that passed without cards. The holidays where I set the table, roasted the turkey, served the slices, and still wasn't offered a chair. By 15, I had memorized every button on the washing machine like it was a second language. I knew which soap brands left less residue. I knew how to stretch spaghetti sauce when groceries were tight. But what I didn't know, what no one ever told me, was that daughters aren't supposed to feel like unpaid staff. And yet, I stayed quiet. I kept my head down. Because somewhere deep inside, I still hoped that maybe, if I did it all just right, they would notice. Maybe love could be earned. Maybe it was a prize given to those who worked hard enough. I still remember the day I burned dinner for the first time. It wasn't even my fault. The oven timer was broken. The casserole came out scorched on the edges. My mother didn't yell. She didn't even raise her voice. She just looked at me like I had failed some unspoken exam. "Caroline never ruined a meal," she said, rinsing her hands in the sink. That single sentence hit harder than any punishment. And I realized then I wasn't allowed to be human. I was only allowed to be useful. Despite it all, I stayed in school, not because my parents expected it, but because Grandpa Walter had once said, "If you want a way out, you've got to build your own exit." So I buried myself in books. I studied by flashlight. After cleaning, I rehearsed economic models between loads of laundry. My teachers began to notice. I had a gift for numbers, data, strategy. One of my economics teachers even pulled me aside and said, "You've got something rare, Rachel. Go after it." But still, I had to play both roles. Student, servant, child, adult. I was growing up, in the background of my own life. And it was quiet. Always so quiet. Until Caroline came home. I remember it vividly. She walked through the door that spring with a diamond ring and a fiancé named Tom, who had perfect teeth and a job in marketing. She squealed, "We're getting married." And my mother dropped a laundry basket like it was Christmas morning. You'd have thought someone won the lottery, but my father actually clapped. Within days, wedding binders filled the kitchen table, catering menus, dress sketches, guest lists. There was champagne in the fridge and music playing in the evenings. My mother cried when Caroline picked her veil. My father practiced walking her down the aisle, with a handkerchief tucked into his shirt, and me. I folded napkins. I ironed tablecloths. I stayed up late, assembling party favors by candlelight, because no one else remembered they needed to be done. Then came the night of my own milestone. The acceptance letters. I laid them out on the dinner table, my hands trembling with excitement. Ohio State, Northwestern, Penn. I had done it. I had made it out. I thought for one side earned applause, but my mother didn't look up from her plate. "That's nice," she said, almost offhandedly. "But there's no money left. We spent it all on Caroline's wedding. Took out a loan even." It was like a door had shut. No conversation. No guilt. Just fact. I looked at them, my lips dry, my throat tight. "You paid for her college," I said softly. My father replied while sipping his drink. "Well, she had more potential." I don't remember what I said after that. I just remembered the way the room felt. Like the lights had gone out, but no one else noticed. That night, I didn't cry. Not right away. I waited until I reached the porch of Grandma Betty's house. I knocked softly, and when she opened the door, I collapsed into her arms like a child again. She didn't ask questions. She just held me. Later that evening, Grandpa brought out a dusty folder, one I didn't know existed. "We've been saving for you since the day you were born," he said. "We knew this day might come." Inside were years of statements, checks, deposit slips. They had planned for the moment my parents wouldn't. They had seen me, all along. That was the night I left home. No one tried to stop me, in fact. I think my mother looked relieved. I moved into my grandparents' home with a suitcase and my dreams. And for the first time, I wasn't cleaning up after people who didn't care if I stayed or went. I was building something entirely my own. I didn't yet know that this quiet strength, this habit of doing everything myself would one day turn me into someone they couldn't ignore. But the foundation had been laid, and the girl they overlooked, she was about to become the woman who bought the house. Let's talk about how I did that, and what happened when I gave it to them, and they tried to take everything again. I remember the exact moment it happened, when all the sacrifice, the cleaning, the cooking, the years of being invisible, collided with 5 simple words. "We can't afford your college." I had just come home from school with 3 acceptance letters tucked into my coat pocket. My heart was pounding so loud, I could hear it in my ears. I'd been offered spots at Northwestern, the University of Michigan, and even a small but prestigious private school in Boston. All of them had top-tier business programs. Every one of them represented a door out of the life I'd been stuck in. It was February, a cold Thursday evening. I waited until dinner, thinking it would be the perfect moment. We were all sitting around the kitchen table. My father was reading the local paper, my mother scooping out mashed potatoes like they were weights she was tired of carrying. I cleared my throat and laid the envelopes down. "I got in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. No one looked up right away. My father grunted, something I couldn't make out. My mother glanced at the paper, picked one up half-heartedly, and mumbled, "That's nice, dear." Then, silence. The kind of silence that settles in your bones. I waited a second longer. 2. Then I added, "They're all great schools, but I'll need help with tuition." That's when she said it. "We can't afford your college." Just like that. No apology, no conversation, no emotion. We spent everything on Caroline's wedding. I stared at her, trying to understand if she even realized what she'd just said. She didn't blink. She went right back to slicing pot roast, like we were discussing the weather. I swallowed hard. "You paid for Caroline's school." "That was different," she said sharply, her voice cool and certain. "We saw potential in her." The air got thinner. I could feel the muscles in my jaw tightening, but I didn't speak. I just looked down at my acceptance letters, the edges already smudged from the sweat on my fingers. No one said congratulations. No one asked which school I was leaning toward. They just moved on, like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't spent 4 years balancing their household and my grades. Like I hadn't traded my childhood for a shot at something better. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror in my room, the same room I had once shared with Caroline, and stared at myself. All the things I never said, I said in that silence. I packed a small overnight bag and made my way to my grandparents' house. I didn't even call. I just walked. I still remember the sound of gravel under my shoes, the weight of the cold against my face, the soft light spilling out of their window like a beacon in the dark. Grandma Betty opened the door before I could knock. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just said, "Come in, sweetheart." and pulled me close. I didn't cry until I sat down at the kitchen table. I told them everything. My words came out in choked waves about the wedding, the money, the way I was dismissed like an afterthought again. Grandpa didn't interrupt, he just listened. When I finished, he stood up without a word, walked into the den, and returned, with a navy blue folder. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing years of bank statements, savings bonds, and neatly clipped deposit slips. "We've been putting money away for you since you were born," he said quietly. "We knew this might happen." It hit me then, this wasn't new to them. They had seen the pattern long before I had the words for it. "We're not rich," Grandpa added, "but we believed in you. We still do. And you're going to college, Rachel." No matter what they say, I sat there stunned. Not because of the money, but because someone had planned for me, chosen me, believed I was worth preparing for. It was the kind of love you don't fully understand until you've lived without it. That was the night my world shifted. I saw the truth, not just about my parents, but about what love is supposed to look like. Love plans, love prepares, love invests, even in silence. Caroline's wedding had cost $50,000. My father bragged about the champagne fountain to his coworkers for weeks. My mother showed off the custom floral arch to every woman at church. It was their grand performance of parenthood. But college, my college, it didn't come with music or applause. It came with a man in a cardigan sweater handing me a folder filled with savings, and a woman in slippers holding my hand across a worn kitchen table. That was real love. I moved in with them that weekend. Back at my parents' house, no one stopped me. No one asked why. They barely noticed I had left. My mother said, "Whatever you think is best," without looking up from the TV. There was something freeing about that moment. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I finally stopped waiting for the apology that was never coming. The next 4 years changed everything. I enrolled at the University of Michigan, studied financial analysis, lived in a dorm room that smelled like ramen and cheap detergent. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I excelled. Not out of revenge, but because I knew who I was. I knew what I had overcome. Every night I studied late. I thought about Grandpa Walter's words. "Don't let anyone waste this brain of yours." Every internship, every exam, every new opportunity was a step further away from the kitchen, where I used to cook meals for people who never said thank you. By the time I graduated, I had a job lined up at a firm in Chicago. Not the biggest one, but enough. Enough to get started. Enough to begin building something of my own. And I did. One raise at a time. One promotion at a time. One morning commute and late-night conference call at a time. I built a life out of nothing, out of other people's scraps. And yet, even as the years passed, I still carried a small hope that maybe one day, just one day, I could share my success with them, not out of obligation, but because that's what I thought family did. It's a dangerous thing, hoping to heal people who never admitted they broke you. And that hope, that old flickering hope, would lead me to buy them a house. My house, the one that started it all. And what happened next? I never saw it coming. Let's go there. I wasn't supposed to make it. Not according to them. I wasn't the one they put their money on. I wasn't the one they toasted to at dinner tables, or bragged about to neighbors, or drove 6 hours to see perform at a college recital. The quiet one in the corner, the math nerd, the girl who cooked dinner in silence, the housekeeper with honor roll grades. No one clapped for, but life has a way of rewarding the ones who kept going when no one was watching. The day I walked into my first lecture hall at the University of Michigan, I felt like an imposter. Most of the students had parents who paid for orientation, who'd bought them dorm essentials in color-coordinated bins. My dorm mattress came from a second-hand store. My desk lamp was missing its shade. My grandparents had hugged me goodbye and handed me a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. But I was there, and I was ready. At first, I kept my head down, sat in the back, took notes with the kind of precision that came from years of quietly absorbing everything around me. I didn't talk much. I wasn't the kid raising her hand in class. But when midterms came, I was the one professors wanted to talk to after lectures. I had a knack, not just for numbers, but for seeing patterns no one else noticed. Systems, leverage, how one variable shifted could collapse or rescue an entire equation. To me, finance wasn't about money. It was about stories told in graphs, margins, and trends. I picked up extra credits every semester, took electives most students avoided. Late nights, I'd be alone in the library long after the cleaning staff had started their rounds, buried in textbooks and spreadsheets, And I loved it. Not just because it made sense, but because it was mine. No one could take it from me. No one could claim they handed it to me. My first internship came the summer after sophomore year. A mid-sized investment firm in Detroit. I still remember the way my hands trembled when I signed the offer letter. I bought my first suit from a Goodwill 2 towns over. It didn't fit right, but I pressed it 3 times until the seams looked sharp. That summer, I worked like I was running out of time. First in, last out. I asked questions, stayed behind to clean up meetings, rewrote client reports when I saw flaws others missed. People started noticing. By August, one of the senior analysts pulled me aside and said, "Rachel, you've got instincts. You ever think about Wall Street?" It felt absurd. Wall Street, me, the girl who used to wash floors and reheat leftovers. But I didn't say no. The next summer, I landed an internship in Chicago. The summer after that, New York. Each year was harder, more competitive, more cutthroat, but also more alive. I felt myself transforming, one deal at a time. I learned how to read rooms, how to make decisions quickly and defend them without blinking, how to speak with confidence even if my voice trembled inside. By the time I graduated with honors, I already had a job lined up with a boutique firm in Manhattan. Not the biggest name, but close. They were known for their aggressive strategy, lean teams, and ruthless pace. I packed my bags, kissed my grandparents goodbye, and moved into a studio apartment in Midtown with a slanted floor and a view of a brick wall. And I didn't care, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving in someone else's shadow. I was building my own. The first year was brutal. 60-hour weeks, coffee for breakfast, vending machines for dinner. I missed birthdays, weddings, and the funeral of a high school friend. But I was learning, climbing. They started giving me real clients, real money to manage, and I delivered by my 3rd year. I was leading small portfolios. By my 4th, I was advising millionaires. By my 5th, I was offered a senior associate role and my own office with the glass wall that overlooked 5th Avenue. My name was etched on the door, in brass. I was 20-8. And no one could pretend. I didn't exist anymore. I had more money in my savings account than my parents had ever seen. I bought a used Lexus, paid off my student loans early, and took my grandparents to a seafood restaurant on their 50th wedding anniversary that had a dress code and white linen napkins. My grandfather cried when the waiter brought out the dessert. Not because of the food, but because, for the first time, he wasn't the one footing the bill. That night, as we walked home under the street lamps, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "You changed the story, Rach." And I had. But even with all the success, every promotion, every bonus check, every compliment from men who used to ignore me in the boardroom, there was still a space in me that waited for a phone call, a letter, an invitation, something that said, "We were wrong." But nothing came. My parents never asked how I was doing. Carolyn never reached out. Every holiday, I sent a card. Every year, I got a generic family photo. In return, no note inside. Just smiling faces, pretending the past had never happened. And still I held on to something. Not anger. Not anymore. Hope, because part of me believed that if I became successful enough, generous enough, loving enough, maybe they'd finally see me. Maybe they'd finally choose me. So, when Grandpa Walter passed unexpectedly after a massive heart attack, I dropped everything and flew back to Ohio. And when Grandma Betty followed just weeks later, I paid for the funeral, handled the arrangements, cleaned out the house, and stood there at the gravesite beside my parents as if we had been one whole family all along. They cried. I cried. Too. For different reasons. In the weeks that followed, I noticed something shift. My parents, once distant and dismissive, became softer. My father made small talk. My mother complimented my coat. We started having coffee together on weekends. It felt like maybe they saw me now. They told me about their financial troubles. Their mortgage was high. Retirement was tight. Caroline's family had moved back in with them. Money was thin. They looked tired, so I did something I had never done before. I offered help. Not out of guilt, not to earn their love, but because I had it to give. I sold my grandparents' house and used the money along with some of my own to buy my parents a new place. A cozy single-story ranch on a quiet street, with a fenced yard and wide hallways. Perfect for aging joints and small children. I handed them the keys, and they cried again. This time, it felt real. For a while, I believed we'd turned a corner. I thought maybe I had finally built a bridge wide enough to hold us all. But I was wrong. Because, a few weeks later, I'd find out about the housewarming party. The one they forgot to invite me to. The one where they told everyone it was their house. That their perfect daughter had helped with the down payment. That I hadn't been around. That I didn't care. And once again, I was reminded you can give people everything, and they'll still choose someone else. But this time, I wasn't the quiet girl in the corner anymore. This time, I had leverage. This time, I had the deed. Let me tell you what happened when I showed up to their party, and reminded them whose house it really was. They say home is where the heart is, but sometimes, it's where the heartbreak happens. The house I bought for my parents sat on a quiet cul-de-sac just outside of Dayton, Ohio. It had white shutters, a wraparound porch, and a maple tree out front that turned blood orange in the fall. It was warm, single-story, and peaceful, everything their old two-story fixer-upper, WASN. Single quotes T. It was never supposed to be a gift wrapped in ribbon or tied to some dramatic gesture. It was supposed to be something simple. A gesture of goodwill. A way to say, we can start again. And for a while, it seemed like we did. My parents beamed when I handed over the keys. My mother even hugged me twice. My father put his hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll take good care of it." I believed him. I had the deed in my name, but I didn't plan on keeping it. I thought maybe, in time, I'd sign it over to them, quietly, as a final act of forgiveness. I was busy in New York, buried in my work, but every Saturday, I'd call and ask how they were settling in. "Oh, the neighborhood's lovely." Mom would say, "Best decision we ever made." Dad chimed in. I asked when they were planning to have the housewarming party. I thought maybe I'd fly out, bring a bottle of wine, meet the neighbors. "We're still working on it," she'd say. "You know how long it takes to get these things just right." Week after week, I asked. Week after week. The answer was the same. Then one evening, I opened my laptop, almost by accident, and saw Caroline's name pop up in the search bar. I hadn't looked her up in years, but something nudged me. There it was. A Facebook post. Public. "I can't wait for this Saturday's housewarming party for Mom and Dad," she had written. So excited to celebrate this new chapter together. My heart slowed. Underneath the post were dozens of comments, caterers tagged, floral arrangements praised, photos of twinkling patio lights already strung across the porch, neighbors, RSVP'd, friends, old coworkers, even distant relatives. Everyone was invited, except me. I stared at the screen for a long time, not angry, not sad, just empty, as if a familiar wave had come to visit me again. That old companion, being the one they forgot on purpose. The house I bought. The party they threw. And no seat for me. I called my mother. "Hey Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Did you ever settle on a date for the housewarming?" There was a pause. Then her voice came, sweet as honey but sharp underneath. "Oh no, not yet, dear. We're still figuring things out. Nothing planned yet." I wanted to believe maybe it was a mistake, that I'd misread the post, or she forgot the invite. But deep down, I knew it wasn't an oversight, it was a message. And yet, I didn't say anything. Not right away. I waited. And on Saturday afternoon, I got in my rental car and drove the 3 hours from Columbus, where I'd been visiting a client, back to that quiet cul-de-sac in Dayton. I parked a block away. From the curb I could already hear laughter, clinking glasses, the swell of old rock and roll playing through the open windows. The driveway was full. The porch was lit with candles. A banner hung above the door. "Welcome home, Mom and Dad." My name wasn't anywhere. Through the window, I saw my father giving a tour of the kitchen. My mother, dressed in pearls and her favorite blue sweater, was holding court in the living room like a first lady. Caroline stood beside her, arms wrapped around her twins, while her husband shook hands with guests like he was running for office. And then I saw it boxes stacked. In the den, labeled in marker, Caroline master bedroom. Books, twins, they weren't visiting, they were moving in. I stood there on the sidewalk for a full 10 minutes. Long enough for a neighbor to wave. Long enough to hear my mother's voice float through the window. "We're just so grateful to finally have a real home." And of course, our Caroline helped with the down payment. She's always thinking of others. Then someone asked about me. I heard her say it. "Oh, Rachel, she's busy, always chasing work. She doesn't really check in. Too independent. For her own good." That was the last straw. I walked up the porch steps and slipped through the side door. Past trays of shrimp cocktail and sparkling lemonade, past the laughter and string lights. I walked straight into the living room. They didn't see me at first, not until I spoke. Actually, I said, loud enough to cut the noise in half. I think you've got that backward. Silence. My father's glass paused midair. My mother's hand clutched a napkin. Caroline's eyes widened, like a child caught playing dress-up in clothes that weren't hers. I bought this house, I said slowly, calmly, letting each word land, with my own money. My own name is on the deed. Not yours, not Caroline's. Mine. My father was the first to recover. He forced a smile. Rachel, sweetheart, this is a bit of a surprise. Yes, I replied. A party at my house that I wasn't invited to. That is a surprise. Murmurs filled the room. Some guests began setting down their plates. Caroline's husband took a step toward me, then back again. Now hold on, my mother said, her voice tightening. You didn't have to come unannounced. Like this. It's a family event. I stared at her. I am family. She looked away. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder. The papers inside were crisped copies of the deed, proof of purchase, title transfer. I held them up for anyone curious enough to doubt me. I was planning to sign it over to you tonight, I said, my voice quieter now. I thought maybe this could be a fresh start. A clean page for all of us. Then I looked around the room at the decorations, the wine glasses, the laughter that had once felt so far from me. But I see now that nothing's changed. My mother stepped forward. Rachel, don't be like this. You can't do this to us. We're your parents. I nodded slowly. No. You're the people who gave birth to me. My real parents, ones who taught me how to love. How to be generous, are buried on a hill outside of Cedar Falls. And they would never have treated me like this. No one said a word. I turned to the guests, many of whom were already gathering their coats. I'm sorry to cut the evening short, I said. But this party is over. You're all standing in a house that doesn't belong to them. It belongs to me, and I'm asking you politely to leave. One by one, they filed out, confused, embarrassed. Some gave me apologetic nods. A few others whispered as they passed. Caroline grabbed her twins and disappeared out the back. Her husband followed. In silence, my mother's face turned pale, then red. My father just stared at the floor, as if looking for a version of the night that could be undone. When the last car pulled away, I stood alone in the living room. Trays half empty, candles still flickering. The house smelled like someone else's. Celebration. And, suddenly, it didn't feel like mine anymore. I sat on the bottom step of the staircase, letting the silence stretch. Then I gathered the papers back into the folder, locked the door, and turned off the lights. I never signed the house over. A few weeks later, I put it up for sale. Because no matter how beautiful the kitchen, or peaceful the porch, a home without respect isn't a home at all. And that night proved something I had spent years trying not to believe sometimes. The ones who raised you will never rise to meet you, no matter how far you climb. But that wasn't the end of the story. Because, after that night, they came back, with phone calls, with messages, with guilt. Let me tell you what they said, and why I never answered. The messages came quickly at first. The morning after the party, my phone lit up with voicemail after voicemail. My father's voice, calm but heavy, asking to talk things over. My mother's sharper, accusing. Caroline's pleading. Please, don't do this to us. You've misunderstood. We were going to tell you. They weren't apologies. Not really. Just frantic attempts to regain control, to patch the cracks without ever acknowledging they had shattered the foundation. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I had finally learned the difference between guilt and responsibility. For most of my life, I thought the pain in our family was something I could fix if I just worked harder, tried longer, gave more. I believed, deep down, that maybe if I became good enough, successful enough, generous enough, they'd finally treat me like I mattered. But you can't earn love from people who only value you for what you give. You can't build trust on silence, or history on obligation. And you sure as hell can't heal in the same place that broke you. So, I blocked the calls, shut down the social media, cancelled my Christmas flight. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to protect my peace instead of apologizing for it. A week later, the house was empty. I met with the real estate agent and signed the listing paperwork with a steady hand. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't bitter. It was just necessary. Letting go doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes with clarity. And mine had arrived. I used part of the proceeds from the sale to pay down my mortgage in New York. The rest I put away for a different kind of future. You see, Somewhere in the quiet after everything, I started thinking about the kind of family I might build someday. Not the kind I came from, the kind I wanted. If I ever have children, they'll never compete for affection in their own home. They'll never wonder if they're enough, or if love depends on performance. They won't be compared to a sibling, like it's a competition. They won't be burdened with earning their place at the table. They'll be met with open arms, not silent thresholds. I'll teach them what Grandma Betty taught me, that knowledge is armor, that love is expressed through presence, and that dignity is not something others hand you, it's something you stand in. I've thought a lot about cycles since that night. How they start, how they stretch through generations, disguised as tradition or parenting style, or just how things are and how they end. The truth is, some people aren't villains, they're just broken in places they've never tried to heal. But that doesn't make them safe to keep close. And it doesn't make it your job to carry the weight of their choices. I could have stayed in their orbit, played the part, gone to birthdays and dinners, sent polite cards, smiled at photos I didn't belong in. I could have kept the peace. But silence isn't peace, and pretending isn't healing. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for them, and for yourself, is to walk away. That Saturday night, standing in the home I paid for, watching them rewrite history with cake and streamers, something in me finally broke loose. Not bitterness. Freedom. The freedom to no longer need their approval. The freedom to stop bleeding just to keep the family picture intact. The freedom to choose myself. After that night, they moved into a small apartment across town. Caroline and her husband and the twins squeezed into the spare room. My parents took the master. I heard from mutual friends that they struggled. Money, tension, blame passed around like a casserole no one wanted to keep. But I didn't call, didn't send money. I didn't show up. And I don't feel guilty about it. Not anymore. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes, it looks like choosing not to answer, not to engage, not to beg. It looks like taking the hurt, setting it down gently, and saying, this does not define me anymore. A few weeks ago, I drove by their apartment complex. I didn't stop. I watched Caroline's twins run across the tiny courtyard, their laughter echoing against the brick walls. I felt something then, not grief, not regret, just a soft sadness for the life we never had, the family we never became, the mother and father who never learned how to see the daughter standing quietly in the kitchen for 20 years. Waiting. And I let it go, because sometimes, family isn't who raised you, it's who respected you, who showed up, who stayed when it wasn't convenient. My grandparents taught me what family truly is, and I carried that with me now into every meeting, every moment, every future choice. Into the family I will one day build, a family where love is unconditional, where birthdays are remembered, where effort is honored, where no one ever feels like an afterthought. That's how the cycle ends. Not with revenge, but with clarity. Not with bitterness. But with peace. I used to think my story was about being overlooked. But it's not. It's about finally seeing myself and realizing that was more powerful than any apology I never got. It's about choosing to leave the door behind and walk forward. Into a life that's mine. Fully, finally, freely mine.